In today's episode, me, a man whose bald head and beard are the only actual personality traits, other than just being average looking, I'm here to roast Clark's performance as Galadriel in Rings of Power. Let's talk about it, like, sub, do the usual, and if you guys want exclusive access to content and early access to content, please consider becoming a channel member or a Patreon. So let's start the roast. Rings of Power Galadriel is a fascinating monstrosity, and the actress does little to add to its favour. Clark comes across as someone who accidentally stumbled off the set of Fast and the Furious, or an angry teenage girl that's got grounded. Let's roast the hell out of her. This is all meant for comedy, and if you're offended, fine. So let's be real. When Amazon unveiled the travesty that is Rings of Power, many people were less than impressed, although there were people clapping like seals in the background to see the return of iconic characters, especially the ethereal Galadriel that most of its audience want to get in her knickers. In Rings of Power, anyway. As one of the most revered elves in Middle-earth, her wisdom and grace made her a fan favourite, and probably one of the most important female characters in fantasy literature. So when Clark stepped into the role, expectations were high. But her portrayal feels less like a serene wise elf lady that we all know, and more like an overly aggressive cashier in Waitrose called Laura who plays the cello, with a major chip on her shoulder, and perhaps way too much caffeine. Clark's Galadriel comes across as someone who accidentally stumbled off that set, waiting for Vin Diesel to pull up in a big car, and onto the Middle-earth sets. It's almost her entire personality revolves around the concept of being reckless, but not wise. Instead, she embodies the kind of energy you expect from someone who's just discovered CrossFit and doesn't stop talking about it. Hi, Amy, I'm talking to you directly. We know you got in shape, but come on. We don't care. From her frequent sword-wielding to the unrelenting frown buried into her face, there's very little of the calm, collected, wise elf that made Galadriel such a captivating figure in the books and the movies. Instead, we're treated to a Galadriel who seems on edge, as if she's about to challenge someone to an arm wrestling match over a cup of elvish tea with lots of chamomile. And let's not forget, she's supposed to be thousands of years old at this point. She's lived through eons of history, witnessed countless wars, and has the wisdom to show for it. However, Clark's portrayal feels more like an angsty teen who just got grounded. Bella from Twilight, anyone? No, Bella from Twilight has more personality. There's a reckless impatience to her delivery that makes her seem less like an ancient being and more like someone who's upset their crush didn't text back, only to later find out that he sparkles. From her frequent sword-waving to the endless scrawl of noise that she seems to project in her performance, instead of embodying the calm, poised presence we come to expect from her, Clark's version feels impulsive and reactionary. Every decision is driven by emotion, what little emotion there is, rather than an experience, and it makes her difficult to connect with. It's like when you go to a sushi restaurant and you watch them chop up the fish. You don't connect with the fish, you're just waiting for your sushi. In fairness, a dead fish has more personality. And there's something to be said about the intensity of that Clark brings to the role. But sometimes it borders on robotic. Her intense brooding stare often comes across as disconnected, almost like a poorly coded NPC waiting for the next dialogue queue to load. You can practically feel the awkward pause as she's waiting for the game to load those next lines, as she chews the sets and rolls her R's. And when she finally speaks, it's often with a swiftness that feels out of place for an elf of her status. Galadriel's dialogue should be filled with gravitas and weight. Instead, we're left with lines that sound more like someone who's memorized a speech, rather than captivating centuries of knowledge. You can read good lines and at least make them sound intelligent, right? Trying too hard to be the action hero is also another thing. It's clear the Rings of Power wanted to portray a more action-oriented Galadriel, which is not necessarily a bad thing, on paper. But Clark's physicality often feels more false than fluid. Watching her dive headfirst into battle sequences feels less like an experienced warrior and more like someone who binge-watched too many action movies and decided they could do it too. There's a lack of natural grace, and a key part of Galadriel's identity that's missing. Her natural grace and elegance. It's almost as if the show's creators tried too hard to make Galadriel the cool one, like a rogue character in a D&D campaign, instead of being mysterious. She's just edgy and loud and set-chewing. And even when no one asks for it, she spends a lot of time shouting at people in this, and the angry woman trope is kind of misogynistic at this point, let's be real. Now, Clark's Galadriel may have been an attempt to offer a fresh take on the character, but it feels more like someone who tried to reinvent a classic dish by burning it to a crisp and calling it rustic. Fans of the original Galadriel were hoping for a portrayal that honoured her sense of wisdom and strength. Instead, we got a version that feels like a warrior with something to prove, lacking the nuance that made Galadriel a beloved figure in the Tolkien's world. Somehow, they made one of the most important characters in fantasy, in my opinion, boring, with the personality of a dead fish, and someone who really acts like she shouldn't be in this role. She can't act, and I've seen her in a few things. Clark is a talented actress, kind of, when she wants to be, when she can project more than two emotions, but her portrayal of Galadriel in Rings of Power is a puzzling take on one of Middle-earth's most iconic characters, rather than showcasing a layered, complex elf who seems seen the rise and fall of kingdoms. We get an action hero who's all intensity and very little substance. I doubt they will ever bring that forward, but she was really bad casting. And maybe the talented pool of actors that they could have got, they couldn't pay for, because she's only earning minimum wage for this, in terms of acting. But maybe in future just go back to Waitrose. You'd fit in better there. You can be sour and grim-faced all you want, rather than just projecting it on screen for hours upon hours.